Asane puti bo mata anale pashibo. Goranga ane kota pabo. Se sabah sangira sange jai koi lo bila. Se sangama paya kante naro samuda. Danilo Prematana Karuna Prachu. Eno Prabhu Kota Gelo Acharya Taku. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Rama. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Rama. Before we read the translation, I'd just like to say a word about the author of this bhajan, Narottam Das. It's a very poignant story. Some of you may have read his biography. He was the son of a king, very wealthy prince, who took to spiritual life, much to the chagrin of his family. And he appeared not long after, well, let's say he came of age as a spiritualist not long after the departure of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he had heard about Lord Chaitanya. He wanted to take initiation from Lord Chaitanya, but Lord Chaitanya left. So then he wanted to take initiation from Lord Nityananda, but Lord Nityananda had also left us. And Rupa, Sanatan, he was trying to connect with all of these great devotees, and they had all left. So finally, he did find shelter from Lokanath Goswami. But this song of separation is very poignant for that reason, because he just came just a little too late to meet all of these great souls about whom he had heard so much. So let's read the translation. He who brought the treasure of divine love and who was filled with compassion and mercy, where has such a personality as Advaita Acharya gone? Where are my Swarup Damodar and Rupa Goswami? Where is Sanatana? Where is Raghunath Das, the Savior of the fallen? Where are my Raghunath Bhatta and Gopal Bhatta? And where is Krishnadas Kaviraj? Where did Lord Gauranga, the great ancestor of the grove? I will smash my head against the rock and enter into the fire. Where will I find Lord Gauranga, the reservoir of all wonderful qualities? Being unable to obtain association with Lord Gauranga, accompanied by all these devotees, association who performed his pastime, now it's in dust. All right, so you have that file. Okay, so this morning we're going to talk about a devotee whose association we also miss tremendously. His name Jayananda Prabhu. I was reflecting how many of my god brothers and god sisters have left this world, and including Jayananda Prabhu. Can we make it big? Yeah. So our generation, my generation, was fortunate to see Srila Prabhupada in person, and that was a wonderful experience, although not all that different from the experience you had with Srila Prabhupada. We saw him, maybe 5% of our groups were really intimate with Srila Prabhupada, and he would know them on a first-name basis. But at least we got to see him give classes and have this, most of all, the security that whatever problem, whatever question came up, we could always ask Srila Prabhupada. It's sort of this ultimate security, like a little boy holding daddy's hand while you're crossing the street. A dangerous world, but daddy's there. So Srila Prabhupada's departure took place when most of us were in our 20s. The very old senior devotees were like 32. So Jayananda Prabhu was a real fixture in the firmament of ISKCON. Everybody knew Jayananda, everybody loved Jayananda, and he passed before Srila Prabhupada, a few months before. So this was in 1977, and I was in Los Angeles at that time. Oh, before we get to that, your generation, by the way, will be the last ones who can say, yes, we saw some of those old crusty Prabhupada disciples still hanging on. You'll be able to say that in your to your disciples in the future. And we have lost, before we get to Jayananda Prabhu was the first, but since then, so many of these great stalwart devotees I just always imagined would be there. We kind of had an inkling Prabhupada would leave, but it wasn't like eminent until it became eminent. But the others like Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj and Tamal Krishna Maharaj and Sridhar Maharaj and Bhakti Charu Maharaj, these are devotees we just always felt would be there in ISKCON, just like the Big Dipper is always there in the stars at night. And when they left, it was quite stunning, quite shocking. So that is just the nature of life in this world. And I sometimes feel like those who had the situation of leaving this world prematurely, you could say, in their prime, were in a way the fortunate ones who had no more business in this nasty material world. You know, so they were able to leave, and the rest of us who are less exalted, less elevated, we're here to continue doing our bit to serve Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in this place, this nasty place. Did anyone see Kadamba Kanana Maharaj's last video? Some of you saw that? It was very poignant. He was just saying, very heartfelt. Now we're all about to go to a much nicer environment where we won't have all of this illness and all of this complication. We'll just be able to have kirtan endlessly. So nice, right? And very heartfelt, very profound. So that's something to remember as we're reading and we're hearing about departed Vaishnavas, that these are devotees who have completed successfully their effort to be Krishna conscious and go back to Godhead. So that's why we celebrate the disappearance days as just as gratefully as the appearance days of these great souls. Okay, so with that said, Jayananda Prabhu was passed away in 1977 in May, about 4 or 5 months before Srila Prabhupada's departure, 6 months. And I was in Los Angeles at that time. Although I had some interaction with Jayananda Prabhu, I did not know him intimately, but there were a number of devotees there who did. So I took the opportunity to interview those who are very close with him and compile it in this article, which was just sort of an exercise for me at the time of grieving in a way. But this gives you, it's written by a young 23-year-old non-educated writer. But somehow it gave a glimpse through all of these other very close, intimate, personal views of Jayananda, gave a glimpse into his life that's really relevant, it turns out, as people have appreciated. So that's what we'll read this morning. And I'd like to ask if you could all just take a turn reading a paragraph. We'll pass the mics around. All right. Who would like to start? All right, is that legible?
After the disappearance of Jayananda Das on May 1st, 1977, His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada instructed devotees all over the world to commemorate the event every year as they would any great Vaishnav's disappearance day. Therefore, we respectfully submit these pages to all devotees and friends of ISKCON as a means to remember and understand more about Jayananda's devotional service. Of course, we will see how he joined ISKCON and how he left this mortal world. More importantly, we shall see the astounding qualities possessed by a true devotee, a sincere disciple and genuine servant of Srila Prabhupada.
Jayananda was the all-American boy, handsome, strong, intelligent, born in more than a middle-class family. Jayananda Jim Kaur took a degree in mechanical engineering from Ohio State University. With a background like that, it is surprising that Jayananda ended up as a cab driver in San Francisco. Karandar once asked him why he didn't get a better paying job. "I didn't fit in with the upper class crowd," he said.
Or just, yeah, inside the second.
Always introspective in nature, Jayananda felt empty and unsatisfied within himself during his college years. He would often say that he was never happy before joining Krishna consciousness. His depression was almost suicidal when, in 1967, he read a small article in a San Francisco paper about an Indian Swami who had come to the Bay Area to propagate the chanting of the names of God. Jayananda recalled feeling a ray of hope when he read that article. Thinking the Swami may have something to offer, Jayananda made up his mind to attend the Swami's lectures.
Srila Prabhupada's early lectures in the Bay Area were mostly attended by hippies, and Jayananda was one of the only straight people there. Jayananda later recalled that I wasn't much of a religionist, but I was attracted to Srila Prabhupada. He was especially fond of attending the early morning lectures because at that hour, most of the hippies would be in bed. On some occasions, Jayananda would be the only guest listening to Srila Prabhupada speak from the Bhagavatam.
Srila Prabhupada was always fond of Jayananda, and sometimes he would invite his budding disciple to take prasad with him in his room. Srila Prabhupada would cook prasad and serve me, Jayananda recalled. He didn't say anything, he just kept feeding me, and I kept eating. Jayananda soon donated his life savings of $5,000 to Srila Prabhupada to help His Divine Grace print the Bhagavad Gita as it is. As more and more devotees joined ISKCON in the Bay Area, Jayananda continued to work as a cab driver and supported the temple by contributing all of his earnings.
5,000 at that time would be about $30,000 or $40,000 today.
Chandanacharya Prabhu remembers this special feature about Jayananda. He was completely enamored by Krishna consciousness. Even when he'd go out on incense runs all by himself, he would rise every morning before 4, have a little Mangal Arti, chant all his rounds, read and cook prasad. He never deviated. He loved it. He was completely happy as long as he was practicing Krishna consciousness.
Take prasadam, for example. Jayananda worshipped prasadam. When a little prasad spilled on the floor, he would always bend down on all fours and lick it up. He loved to cook, offer, distribute, and eat prasad in a big way. He He would always take prasad with him and distribute it, whether he was making a boga run, buying bulk foods for the market, or taking a chanting party downtown. He would even say prasadam in a special way that made you immediately want to take some.
Jayananda knew how to attract people to Krishna consciousness with the prasadam weapon. When a new devotee came, for example, Jayananda would see to it that he was sumptuously fed with prasadam. When Jambavan Das was just becoming a devotee, Jayananda would bring him a plate of prasadam so big that he thought he'd never eat it all. When he finally did finish the plate, Jayananda immediately put an identical plate down before him. "I can't eat that," said Jambavan. "Srila Prabhupada said that we would eat till we rattle like a duck," said Jayananda. Jambavan would finish the second plate.
Of course, Jayananda himself could be found honoring large quantities of prasad anytime, day or night. He was the kind of devotee who would come up to you at 10 o'clock with some peanut butter halva and say, "Hey, Prabhu, come here, check this out."
It's 10 p.m. Go ahead.
Another example of his attachment to Krishna consciousness is Jayananda's love for kirtan, chanting. Jayananda was always eager to take the whole temple out on Harinam chanting parties. He had a special attraction for chanting in the streets. Whether kirtan was held in the temple or in the street, Jayananda could always be seen dancing and chanting enthusiastically. When he was making Maharaj Das into a devotee, Jayananda would visit his house and have big kirtans. Even if there were only 2 of them, they would jump and chant, "Nitai Gaur Hari Bol." Also, Karandara recalls how, one day, after working very hard for 10 hours straight, Jayananda suddenly announced, "Hey, it's 10 to 7. Let's go to Artik." Everyone else was so tired that Artik was the last thing on their minds. But Jayananda quickly jumped into the shower and then bounced down to the temple room for Artik.
Of all the processes of Krishna consciousness, Jayananda was most attached to preaching, whether it was during the Sunday feast, while making incense runs, or while building Ratha Yatra carts. Jayananda was always trying to find some person with whom he could share his ecstasy in Krishna consciousness. His preaching was very simple and easy to listen to. We just have to keep chanting and have faith in the name. We just have to chant and take prasadam. Srila Prabhupada is so kind to give us such a simple process.
I can't see it.
Karandara remembers how Jayananda preached to him on his first day in the temple. As they worked together preparing a little garden for Srila Prabhupada at the old Los Angeles temple, Jayananda said, "You know, things don't always go just right in Krishna consciousness. You have to keep chanting." At the time, Karandara couldn't imagine how anything could go wrong in Krishna's service. Years later, however, as he found himself still remembering those words, Karandara could appreciate the real potency of what Jayananda had said. So many things may come and go, just have faith in the name.
Brings us to Anthony's eyesight.
It's far, it's small.
As soon as he felt a person was at, is that where we're at?
Yeah.
As soon as he felt a person,
It's Jayananda's.
Jayananda's preaching was very attractive for the non-devotees. Janan Acharya recalls seeing Jayananda engaged in preaching late one night. It was 11:30 and Jayananda was up fixing a broken down Sanskrit van. Was it?
Sankirtan.
Sankirtan van. And he lay on his back working under the van. He preached to the 2 hippies who were standing nearby. All day they could see him in a pair of legs, but they stood by listening, completely absorbed in Jayananda's work and preached that way.
As soon as he felt a person was at all ready, Jayananda would preach to him about chanting and about Srila Prabhupada. There was no protocol or strict etiquette, just sincere and confidential glorification of Krishna. True to his character, Jayananda was often seen preaching to guests from his wheelchair, even during his last days in this world. Devotees who knew him could tell him from a distance exactly what he was saying. You just have to have faith in the name.
Jayananda's humility.
Humility was certainly Jayananda's most prominent quality. He treated everyone as his superior, even new devotees. Maharaja Das remembers that Jayananda was always asking his advice. Hey, Dr. Mike, what do you think of this? Although his service was glorious, he never wanted any glory. He avoided praise, like the plague. Devotees got to know that I have to move forward. Devotees got to know that if they wanted to be around him, they'd better not praise Jayananda. Otherwise, he would simply leave. Once he was with Danavir, someone came to Jayananda and began praising him. Jayananda just ignored it. Later he turned to Danavir and said, you know, you've been around this movement a few years. People naturally offer you some respect. Not that his service or qualities were so great, he was just around a few years, was his humble thinking. If he ever spoke about himself, Jayananda would speak so humbly that Lochan Das recalls, it was difficult not to think of yourself as being better than him. If you had any reason to be puffed up, Jayananda would bring it out in you. Feeling himself unworthy, he would step aside so that others could lead kirtan, give classes, or do arti. Instead, he could be found fixing cars, unplugging toilets, washing dishes, taking out trash.
Once a new boy came to visit the San Francisco temple, he wanted to help, so Keshava Das sent him to the trash area where Jayananda was preparing a weekly trash run. Jayananda told the boy, I'm the garbage man around here. For years, I've been watching garbage men carry out trash, and now Krishna is giving me a chance to do this for him. The boy not only helped load the trash, but accompanied Jayananda to the garbage dump. Later, that boy became a devotee, and he recalled thinking, if the garbage men at this temple can be so blissful, just imagine what the rest of the devotees are like. Ara Andara Karanda recalls another incident of Jayananda's humility. One day before the Rath Yatra, I spent the whole day running around with Jayananda. By the time we got back to the temple, it was midnight. The whole building was so crowded that we couldn't find any space to lie down. Finally, we found a room in one little storage closet. I was so tired that all I could do was throw my sleeping bag on the floor and lie down. And I saw Jayananda walking out of the room. I asked him, where are you going? He said he'd be right back, but I kept pressing him, and finally he explained that he had some rounds of japa chanting to finish up. He didn't want to keep me awake by chanting in our room, nor did he want me to feel bad because he was going out to do something else. He just wanted to slip away to some corner and fulfill his vow. I remember saying sometimes it's not possible to finish all one's rounds because there's so much work to do. That's okay, I'm not too tired, Jayananda replied. I was amazed not only by his consideration for me, but by his full submission to Srila Prabhupada.
Although perfectly qualified, Jayananda was reluctant to take a post as temple president or sannyas. It was not that he wouldn't or couldn't do it. He would do whatever was asked of him. He was happy as just to be working under someone. In this way, he was the backbone of the Bay Area's ISKCON temple for years. Through frequently changing administrations, he would always faithfully serve the acting temple president. He was very special, and yet no one paid any special attention to him. That was just the way he liked things.
I'm going to interject a few stories. Again, I picked these up 45 years ago. And actually, a lot of the devotees who told us these stories have also left this world now. But I've heard a few since then that did not make it in print and probably should never be printed, but you can hear them this morning. So Jayananda had a certain insurance policy from his family with some various provisions. And one of them was that when he would get married, he would receive $10,000. And so the temple president found out about this and said, I want you to get married and give us the money. It was like shooting soccer. No, so he entered an arranged marriage, but he was a very detached husband, to say the least. He never moved out of the men's ashram. He didn't spend much time with his wife. And finally, she got disappointed in the arrangement and left And then somebody asked him, so how do you feel? He said, I guess I was just too attached. So that was the wild and woolly West in those days. And presidents would ask the devotees to do those things. Actually, money was very, very scarce. There was a huge amount of money in those days. So that was one of his pastimes. He never married again. And we'll make the book. Okay, please go ahead.
Jayananda's service attitude. Jayananda was always ready to do whatever was necessary to push on Krishna consciousness. He was expert at everything: cooking, preaching, deity worship, public relations, sankirtan, selling incense, construction, and everything else it takes to run a temple. He was a tireless worker. He would be the first one up in the morning and the last one to sleep at night. It was Jayananda who was always running out to get the flowers, Jayananda who was washing dishes and making sure the kitchen was clean, Jayananda who was often missing class while he was out doing service, and Jayananda who was always encouraging others to go out and preach and setting the example himself. Whatever assignment he was given, he would always get done, even if he had to suffer personally for it. No matter how hard he was working, he would never stop for a nap during the day. He seemed to be inexhaustible. Jambawan Prabhu remembers that many times the San Francisco devotees would go out to Berkeley to distribute the leftover prasad after a Sunday feast. First, Jayananda would be in the kitchen cleaning, and someone would say, "Hey, how about this leftover prasadam?" Jayananda would say, "Okay, first let's get this kitchen clean." He would organize the cleanup crew and then work twice as hard as anyone. Then he would transfer the prasad, load it, and the devotees would into the van, drive the van to Berkeley, organize the distribution of prasad.
Built in the room at the time.
In later years, when he was with the Damodar Traveling Sankirtan Party, Jayananda would help manage and sustain the traveling bus program and simultaneously do all-day Sankirtan, day in and day out, side by side with Brahmachari scarcely half his age. In spite of his advanced condition and seniority, he never asked for any special treatment. Leading devotees would often describe him as the most advanced devotee in the movement.
Jayananda's freedom from fault finding. Those who knew Jayananda always noticed one remarkable quality about him. He could not criticize others. It was against his nature. Even if a devotee did something which warranted criticism, Jayananda would usually say nothing, or else something that made the mistake appear to be perfectly understandable. No matter who was giving class or leading kirtan, he would always appreciate it. He never spoke harsh words or chastised anybody. If one devotee was criticizing another within earshot of Jayananda, Jayananda would simply leave.
Rather than criticize others, Jayananda would contribute nothing less than positive Krishna conscious energy to any situation. Sometimes devotee would bring up their expansive aspirations for spreading Krishna consciousness. Jayananda would always encourage their ideas, however extraordinary. At the same time, he was not a fool. He could always pick the right man to do a particular duty. Because he knew how to encourage people, the temple leaders would always assign new men to work with Jayananda. He saw no distinction between new devotee and old devotee. Both were his superiors. He could quickly give a new man a sense of identity and a feeling that he belonged in Krishna consciousness. True Vaishnava, he was expert at fanning any little spark of Krishna consciousness into a big fire. Few will dispute the claim that Jayananda made more devotees and helped more pull through than anyone else in the movement.
Dear to everyone, like the 6 Goswamis, Jayananda was dear both to the gentle and the ruffians. He was as much at home with the Italians at the produce market as with the brahmacharis in the temple. He would make friends on street sankirtan, and they would often come up to him and say, "Hey, where have you been?" Once a devotee was approached by a staggering drunk in San Francisco. The drunk looked at his robes and asked the devotee, "Hey, where's my old friend Jayananda?"
Go ahead, please.
Many devotees, including Danavir and Chandanacharya, had the experience of taking over Jayananda's old territory on incense selling runs or boga runs. They would meet people who said such things as, "Where is Johnny Ananda?" or "That man, he's the nicest and most pure man I've ever met." One man told Chandanacharya, "Well, I don't know I don't know much about your philosophy, but if that Jayananda is into it, it must be all right.
Once near the Rath Yatra cart worksite, Jayananda invited Keshava to step inside a bar and meet some friends of his. They walked inside and immediately some 25 faces looked up and smiled brightly. Someone said, "Oh, this must be your friend you were telling us about, the temple president." They presented the two devotees with a sack full of vegetarian groceries, which they had chipped in together to buy. Among the devotees, Jayananda was like a big brother, always compassionate and willing to listen to them. But devotees rarely burdened him with their problems. When you were around Jayananda, said Karandar, you had no problems.
The devotees loved Jayananda and talked about him during long drives and traveling Sankirtan. He was dear to them because he had a sense of humor too. Jamvan recalls being awakened one night at midnight by Jayananda. "Wake up," said Jayananda. "I've got a benediction for you." He then pushed a big samosa into the sleepy Jambavan's mouth. Like Maharaj Yudhisthira, Jayananda's enemy was never born.
Jayananda was very eager to serve, to see everyone engaged in Krishna's service. He once wrote, "When I reflect on my consciousness, had I not had association with devotees and Srila Prabhupada, I shudder to imagine the nightmare I would be in. If we could become a little dedicated to distributing the mercy, so many could be saved, so much suffering." Because of his genuine compassion, Krishna gave Jayananda the unique ability to make people want to serve Krishna, directly or indirectly. Whenever a new bhakta would come, Jayananda made him feel that he was engaged in important work. He was older, bigger, and stronger than just about anyone in the temple, and everyone was glad to be working under him. He was willing to let people do things their own way without getting finicky about details, unless somebody's creativity interfered with practical necessity. New bhakta or old, everyone felt satisfied after the day's work with Jayananda. This was especially evident during the Rath Yatra time. Jayananda would organize a crew of cynics, bloopers, and cooperative personalities and devotees of the street to build the Rath carts. Although many of his men sat down for a smoke during breaks, he would get them to work 10, 12, or 14 hours a day. He was always glorifying others and working hard himself. In fact, he worked harder than anybody else. All those qualities made him very inspiring to work with. Moreover, there was something very personal about Jayananda that made everyone want to help him. Once he and Maharajadas were struggling to load a heavy refrigerator on a truck. Two drunks were walking up the alley, and Jayananda said, "I'm going to give them a chance to do some devotional service." His enthusiasm for devotional service was usually contagious, and this was no exception. Those drunks were right in there, helping, and the job was done in no time. Afterwards, as usual, Jayananda said to the drunks, "Now say Hare Krishna. Now say Krishna. Now say Hare Krishna. Now say Hare, now say Krishna, now say Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Jai, Hare Bol." Thank you, fellas. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Jayananda's frugality. Jayananda was well known as a transcendental miser. He hated to spend any of Srila Prabhupada's money. Personally, he had almost no possessions, even during his years as a householder. When he was on the road selling incense, he would sleep in the car or on a bench, or sometimes with friends he'd make in various cities. Many of these friends, such as Maharaj Das and Jiva Das, later became devotees as a result of Jayananda's preaching. Jayananda would use his personal charm with people to get them to give everything free or at a discount from Krishna. Without spending huge sums of money, he would personally collect nearly all the boga, flowers, lumber, paint, and everything else needed to put on the Rath Yatra each year. One year, there were hundreds of devotees at the temple to feed just before the festival. Jayananda went to see one of his famous friends at the produce market, Banana King Louis. He came back with 4 free truckloads of bananas and first-class pineapples. Coupled with some donated milk products, the devotees ate bananas, pineapples, and cream as much as anyone could eat, all for free.
Jayananda would get almost anything done for free, such as printing, advertising, and mimeographing for Rath Yatra publicity. What he couldn't get for free, he'd get at a discount, and when he paid, he'd get his money's worth. For example, after the festival would end, he'd rent a big truck with which to haul all the equipment back to the temple. Although the devotees would be exhausted after weeks of hard work, he'd insist that everyone come out and help pack things away, lest he have to keep the truck another day and pay another $50 rent. Although he was a senior devotee and could have had anything he wanted, he always dressed in old dhotis and wore clothes which he'd buy for $1 per set at the Salvation Army thrift store.
So there's a story in this connection in New York in 1976. This was the first Rath Yatra in New York. And Jayananda was there working very hard. This was when his health was beginning to fail, but nobody knew that. And he would be around the temple all day, and he had these jeans with big holes in the knees. Finally, the temple president said, Jayananda, you can't go around with jeans like this, please. And so the next day, Jayananda had the same jeans as cutoffs. And the temple president told this other devotee who related the story, please take Jayananda out to get some pants. So they went together to a store. He went in the store, found some pants, and then Jayananda says to the other devotee, I think I can do it. He just started walking towards the exit with the pants under his arm. And the security guard caught him. And so he was arrested and charged, and he had to go to court for shoplifting. So the devotee went with him to court, and there was the security guard who testified this person was trying to steal. And then Jayananda said to the judge, yes, Your Honor, I was trying to steal those pants because I work for a religious organization. We have very little money, and I just can't stand to spend any of the church's money on myself. And then the security guard started crying. Said, Your Honor, I'll pay for the pants. Case was dropped. This was his frugality. Okay.
Jayananda was the backbone of the Bay Area Rath Yatra for years, and his experiences at each one are summarized in the 1977 Rath Yatra edition of Back to Godhead magazine. Behind the scenes, Jayananda was doing everything in preparation for each festival. He would beg food, flowers, and funds, buy materials, and build the carts, advertise, arrange for permits, and organize the cooking and serving of prasad. Although things always went right down to the wire, he would consistently succeed in fulfilling all his plans every year. After the festival, Jayananda personally brought a prasadam cake or pie to each and every person who had helped in some way or another. Because of his efforts, the devotees in the Bay Area enjoy, to this day, an amazingly harmonious relationship with the city officials. During the weeks before the festival, Jayananda would sleep at the site where the Rath carts were under construction. He would rise every day at 4 a.m. without fail, even if that meant he was getting only 3 hours sleep or less. To keep his crew enlivened, he would cook fantastic prasadam on a tiny gas stove at the site. The preparations were always carefully offered, and each was filled with so much bhakti that the temple devotees would sometimes sneak down to the cart site just to get some. Jayananda regarded his final Rath Yatra, the 1976 festival in New York, to be his most successful. Here's how he described the event in a letter to Keshavadas.
Somehow I got the good fortune to work on the New York Rath Yatra. It was such an auspicious opportunity. Prabhupada was coming, and there was finally a first-class center in Manhattan, and somehow Toshan got an okay to use Fifth Avenue for the parade route. Jamawan was there, and we had a couple of other boys who worked every night. I was praying that somehow we could just get the carts finished. Somehow, by Krishna's grace, it worked out. You wouldn't have believed some of the events. The night before the festival, Saturday, at about 5 or 6 p.m., we were raising Balram's dome, and it was at the top when a huge gust of wind caught it and blew the whole thing over. The framework was all busted, and the tubbing twisted, etc. I didn't see how we could rectify the situation, as there was so much to do on the other 2 carts. But 2 devotees who were expert builders vowed they did somehow get it back together. I had some extra pipes, etc., and they worked all night, and by Krishna's grace, all 3 chariots were at 5th Avenue and 59th Street by 6:30 a.m. Sunday morning.
There was an elderly couple who lived nearby, and they were watching the devotees all these carts from their apartment. And then they saw this whole incident where the cart top was blown over. And then they stayed up all night and just watched the devotees working, and then came out the next day and told them. We really appreciate that. We're amazed at how dedicated people are. Somehow they got it together.
I heard that lock that they were using, it was actually like.
Yeah, we're not sure if that's an urban legend started by the Republican Party. But allegedly, yes, this was a lot that Trump agreed to let the devotees use. No.
Whatever.
Okay. Oh, we don't have to, anyone who'd like to read, we're almost done.
Jayananda's relationship with Srila Prabhupada. Jayananda.
There's no place.
All right. There's no place like New York for the Rath Yatra. The parade was tremendous, as there was a scene in the park. Even when they pulled the carts back to the construction site, people would come out of their apartments and bars and chant Hare Krishna. I guess that occasion was perfection of my career in Krishna consciousness. Jayananda's relationship with Srila Prabhupada. Jayananda said of Srila Prabhupada, I knew he didn't want to cheat me, so I wanted to work for him. In his dealings with Srila Prabhupada, Jayananda kept his usual low profile. He was generally up working on some project while Srila Prabhupada came to San Francisco. The relationship was therefore, as Karandara describes it, one of old friends, but very economical. That is to say, Jayananda did not go in for long meetings with Srila Prabhupada, even when all the other temple leaders were doing so. By way of reciprocation, Srila Prabhupada would invariably call for Jayananda when he arrived at the temple. Sometimes he would have to make repeated requests, and when Jayananda was finally located, he would resist, saying, no, I can't go to see him. I'm too dirty, I'm too fallen. He'd work after festivals and let others see Srila Prabhupada. Thus, Jayananda's relationship with Prabhupada was always one of service. Service to Prabhupada was the core of Jayananda's life. Once Dhanavir asked him, how does one make spiritual advancement in Krishna consciousness? Jayananda answered, I don't know. I'm too busy working to think about it. Srila Prabhupada always appreciated Jayananda's sincere service. He wrote to Jayananda in December 1975, I was very happy to get your recent letter. I'm always thinking of you and praying to Krishna for your advancement in Krishna consciousness. Yes, I remember the old days in San Francisco. Krishna has been so kind upon me to have sent so many sincere disciples to help me push on this movement on behalf of my Guru Maharaj. You continue with your program there in San Francisco, always strictly keeping our principles, and Krishna will bless you with greater and greater realization of the importance of this movement. I am dependent upon you, my older disciples, to carry it on. I hope this meets you well.
Jayananda's final meeting with Srila Prabhupada took place in New York City at the 1976 Rath Yatra. When Prabhupada arrived at the airport, Jayananda drove the car to pick him up. Prabhupada was sitting in the back seat and asked, who is driving? The devotee said, this is Jayananda. Oh, I know Jayananda, said Prabhupada. He gave me $5,000 to print my Bhagavad Gita. Jayananda's fearlessness. Jayananda was not only big and powerful in body, he was strong with faith in Krishna. Therefore, nothing could frighten him. Once on San Francisco's Market Street, Jayananda was playing Mridanga and leading a kirtan party when down the street an enormous man appeared. He was at least 7 feet tall and weighed perhaps 300 pounds. His unkempt beard and drunken appearance indicated that he was an old veteran living in the bars off his pension. As he approached the kirtan party, the temple's reserve Kshatriyas, Keshavadas and Guru Kripadas, readied themselves for a fight. Sure enough, the monster marched up to Jayananda, turned and began to shout, stop that chanting. Jayananda looked him straight in the eye and said firmly, just chant Hare Krishna, just chant Hare Krishna.
To everyone's amazement, the drunk simply turned and walked away without a scrap.
The ultimate expression of Jayananda's fearlessness came at the end of his life when he was diagnosed with leukemia and cancer of the lymph glands. He wrote from the hospital, "I was out of the hospital for a month going to the clinic, and now I am back for a couple of weeks of intensive treatment. Actually, the whole thing was a real blessing, as it made me realize that death is right at hand. Somehow, I need these potent reminders to help me advance in Krishna consciousness. By the time I was in the temple, I was appreciating Krishna consciousness so much more than ever before. So it's been a real blessing." Even in his last few months in LA temple, Jayananda never succumbed to fear or self-pity. When his friends would come to his room and see his withered form and ghostly appearance, they would find it hard to talk their way around his condition. What Jayananda communicated, on the other hand, was complete disinterest in the whole subject of his health. Instead, he was scheming how to put on Ratha Yatra in Los Angeles. Sitting on the lawn in his wheelchair, looking like death personified, Jayananda could not stop thinking and talking about Ratha Yatra. Karandar remembers looking at him from his desk. Jayananda was there, the epitome of Krishna consciousness and fearlessness of death. Karandar thought it odd that he didn't feel any great pity or remorse for Jayananda. Then he could understand that if Jayananda was so Krishna conscious, how could anyone look at him and not also be Krishna conscious?
Jayananda pushed on the Los Angeles Ratha Yatra until he was so weak that he could no longer pick up the phone and call old friends to ask for donations. Actually, he collected a large amount of Lakshmi and devised the various means by which the festival could take place. Festival managers will readily admit that without Jayananda's presence, the first Ratha Yatra festival in LA would not have taken place in 1977. Thus, he proved that by engaging in devotional service, one transcends even the fear of death.
At this time, the devotees had never had a Ratha Yatra in Los Angeles, and so they made a plan to have it down on Venice Beach, a very prominent spot in the city's recreational area. And it would be a big deal, requiring a lot of negotiation with the city. So the temple leader, Rameshwar Maharaj Prabhu, he said, yeah, Jayananda, I promise you, we're going to do this in 1978. I promise you. And this was 1977. Jayananda was not having any. So he had another provision in his insurance policy for some cash for medical treatment should he have some terminal disease. And so he got that cash, and then without telling anybody, he ordered all the lumber necessary to build the Ratha Yatra carts, and he had it delivered to the temple parking lot. So all of a sudden the devotees come out one day, and there's all this lumber where they want to park their cars. So they had no choice but to build a. He forced them to do it in 1977. He forced them, and they did it just by his pushing. They grabbed it, the permits, they got it organized, they got the carts built, and it was held in August of that year, and it's been held every year since then on Venice Beach. Yeah. So yeah, he was very focused. So last little paragraph here.
Conclusion: that Jayananda passed away while Srila Prabhupada was still on the planet is not insignificant. In this way, Srila Prabhupada was able to confirm to all of us that everyone should follow the example of Jayananda. Certainly, those who knew Jayananda should take it upon themselves to preach about his qualities of humility, eagerness to serve, equanimity, and devotion to Krishna and Prabhupada. We offer our humble obeisances to all such devotees who understand these qualities and try to share them. We offer our humble obeisances unto His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, and to Sri Srimad Jayananda Prabhu, the exemplary teacher of devotional service in Krishna consciousness.
All right. So how was that? You find that? It's a little old school writing, but a glimpse of the character of Jayananda. One more confidential story that I learned later from Tamal Krishna Maharaj. In 1969, Srila Prabhupada was in San Francisco, 68, 69, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj was getting his second initiation. So he was going, in those days, everyone would go to Prabhupada. Prabhupada would give them the Gayatri mantra in the ear, the way it's done traditionally. And so as Tamal Krishna Maharaj was going up for his Gayatri, Jayananda said, I think I'll go along. I need a refresher on my Gayatri. And so they went together and Prabhupada agreed, yes, we'll start with Jayananda. So he began repeating the mantra. He said, so just repeat after me. Om, Om, Bhur. He would say each word and Jayananda would try to repeat it. But he was not very good at Sanskrit. And after a half an hour, Prabhupada smiled and said, it is hopeless. But whatever you say, because you're sincere, Krishna will accept it. So he was known for having the fastest Gayatri in ISKCON. When everyone would stop for Gayatri, he'd be up in about 30 seconds. So this was the intimacy of his relationship with Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada saw his sincerity, and he was the only one of Prabhupada's disciples who was canonized in this way. And canonized meaning that we were instructed to observe his disappearance day as a Vaishnava festival day, like today. So it's just before the day of Lord Nrsingadev's appearance when Jayananda left this world. And the devotees would come and see him in his room each morning, and the devotee came in around Mangalarti time and brought the garland from Lord Nrsingadev and gave it to Jayananda and saw that he had left his body. That was the day. This day, what was that, 46 years ago today. Yeah. So any reflections from this? Yes. HG Jayananda Prabhu.
Thought I could maybe also share some memories I had heard already in the past. I don't think it was mentioned here, but it did mention the different people that he used to interact with at the market and so on, and how they missed him when he was not here anymore. And there's another lady who worked in, I guess, the city's offices that he would usually go to arrange permits and things. And when other devotees came to do the same thing, she asked where he was, and when she heard he had left, she started crying and she was completely destroyed. You know, he had such a relationship, even with people he only saw now and then. And then I also thought of sharing, when he was in the hospital, he would still get up in the morning to offer his obeisances to his picture of Prabhupada, even though he was in great pain. And he would be sharing Krishna consciousness with the others. And when the hospital staff actually started asking him to stop preaching to the other patients, that's when he decided he's going to leave the hospital. If he can't preach there, he didn't see the use of being there. Yeah, and he was very humble, even though he was probably the most advanced one. When they were discussing philosophy, he would always say, oh, I don't really get time to read the books, I'm just building cars. He had that kind of thing. Yeah, there's many things we can say from him.
That's so humble, he was invisible. But that's the beauty of a devotee like that everybody just feels his presence. Anyone else like to share any thoughts, reflections? There was an incident where his mother was passing away. And it so happened that the nurse in the hospice was a devotee.
It was in Boulder, Colorado.
In Boulder. And you knew this nurse.
She was the hospice caretaker, and she was caring for his mother.
Can you tell us the story?
Yeah, I can tell you my. She was. Yeah, I knew her. She was the wife of a devotee who was doing some home programs with us. I just remember her sharing that she was caring for this woman, and the woman asked her. At a certain point, the woman noticed her neck beats and said, "Are you a Krishna devotee or something like that?" And she said, "Yeah." And she said, "Oh, my son was a devotee." And she said, "Oh, who's your son?" And she said, "Jayananda." You mean the Jayananda? And so, she saw it as how Krishna was taking care of even Jayananda's family.
Yes, and then when the other children came when she was leaving, they were all appreciating and glad that this devotee was there. Yeah, beautiful. All right. Anything else? Anyone have any thoughts about this notion about how your generation is getting to interact with Prabhupada disciples, and you'll be the last generation to ever do that? What does that mean to you? Any thoughts?
Even like 15, 20 years ago, as far as I remember, my father would say every time like Prabhupada disappeared, this disciple would leave the world. He would just express like a lot of like, grief and say that one by one, like they're leaving the world, like just imagine one day when they will be like nonsense of Prabhupada. So that is always like just like imagining that was maybe a lot of grief, like we're getting to your first-hand experiences of Srila Prabhupada. Like we didn't see him, but hearing that from people like you, like it makes us like wonder more about him. It's like I don't know if you haven't seen a person, but you know someone who has seen that person. So hearing those stories, like fill you with a lot of wonder and amazement. I guess in like Rukmini and the wives of the Brahmana, they never like saw Krishna, but hearing from people who had seen Krishna, they got so much like satisfaction and like attachment to Krishna. That's what we feel about Srila Prabhupada, hearing about him from you and
Yeah, there's so much, so many testimonials like we read here from about Srila Prabhupada. So I really encourage everyone to take advantage of that. That's much more than we had at your age. And it is our attachment to Prabhupada that is really the lesson to learn from Jayananda's life and others. You know, that's the common thread that binds us together, and the key to our success in sharing Krishna consciousness with the world and experiencing it ourselves, just our relationship with Srila Prabhupada. So that is perhaps the most exemplary quality of Jayananda Prabhu, how Prabhupada lifted him from depression and suicide to this ecstatic life. I meant to bring this beautiful little piece he wrote in his notebook in the end of his life. I think I put it in The Saint Within. Could you get a copy from me? Do we have a copy of The Saint Within? I think I put it in there. In any case, after he passed, the devotee found his notebook and he wrote this little summary of the effects of Krishna consciousness, that by reading this book, you will understand your place in the universe. You will become more happy than you had. You'll become so happy that you will want to be active all day and always feel enlivened. And you'll want to sleep less than you slept before, but you'll wake up more refreshed. And just this long list of benefits that he had derived from practicing Krishna consciousness was, anyway, if I can find it, I'll post it on the chat group. It was really profound. It's very relevant, just ever fresh. And I think so many of us who took up Krishna consciousness in our youth have this dramatic experience of depression to joy that has remained with us throughout our lives and continued to be the inspiration to pursue our spiritual lives. So that's our goal at Krishna House, to share that experience with you as much as it may touch your life and as much as it may bring you the joy that it brought to Jayananda and so many others. All right, so tomorrow morning, you'd asked me to speak about Lord Nrsimhadev, there's no time, but we have His Holiness Romapad Maharaj tomorrow morning, right? A very senior devotee here, a great opportunity to hear about the pastimes of Lord Nrsimha from a very scholarly and staunch devotee, Romapad Maharaj. So I hope everybody can take full advantage of that. It's a fast day till dusk or death, whichever comes first. So very auspicious days today and tomorrow, and then like Friday, Saturday. You want to mention that? Saturday, bus trip to New Vrindavan. So, so glad you could be here with us. Good to see you again. All right, Srila Prabhupada.